I'm Susannah.
And I'm Sarah, and this is our podcast, Silent Matters. Hi everyone, welcome back to another podcast. So today we've got a special guest once again. We've actually got Bree Gorman joining us today, who is massive in the people and inclusion strategy space, if I've got that correct. Probably not so much. I'll let Bree introduce herself, and then the main thing why Bree's come on today anyway is to talk about inclusion in the workplace. But I'll let Bree kind of explain. I've got Suze here also. So,
hi everyone.
Hi. But Bree's going to go through a little bit about what she does because she can explain it better than I can, and then we'll talk about how that kind of works in with HR and recruitment and that kind of stuff. So
yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me.
No.
Yes, I'm Bree. I use they them pronouns. So that is something that some people find very difficult, but it's okay. You can get that wrong. Language is hard, and I'm totally respective of that. So that means I'm genderqueer or non-binary, and I spend my work time as a diversity, equity and inclusion consultant. So I work predominantly with workplaces to create more inclusive environments, but also to increase the diversity.
Yep.
We know there's a number of people that are still absolutely kept out of corporate organisations in Australia based on their identity attributes. So we work really hard to kind of break down those barriers, create equal opportunities, and also help people come along with that journey who perhaps are a little bit confused about what diversity, equity and inclusion is actually all about.
Yeah. So kind of what is it like when you're talking about what does it actually mean about diverse? Like who are we talking about, or who do you feel isn't included in the workplace? Like what's still happening now that we need to be more aware of, do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. So obviously there's still a huge focus on gender equity. So trying to get more women into leadership roles, into industries that typically haven't had a lot of women within them. But also on the flip side, we work a lot with organisations too that are highly feminised workplaces. So if you're looking at childcare centres or nursing as a profession, we absolutely want people of all genders in those professions as well. So gender equity is still a key focus, but unfortunately there's been this kind of key focus in Australia on gender that has detracted from the reality of people of colour, people with disability, people from other forms of marginalisation or minority backgrounds.
Okay.
And so, diversity is really about looking at our organisations and going, okay, well, if we all look the same and if we've all come from the same backgrounds, that's not the best thing for our business, but it's also not fair. It's not the best thing for people.
How about if
either.
they have the best skill set? So say if you are recruiting a role and you just happen to be the same cultural background, seems to fit that role, are you hiring based on their skill set for that role, or are you hiring on inclusion?
Yeah, there's this real kind of misperception that increasing diversity means kind of pushing people out who would otherwise be the best people for the job, and that's not true at all. The reality is that there are multiple barriers that present themselves for people who absolutely have those skills and could be the best person in that job, but don't get the opportunity to be. Whether it's because of discrimination that they've experienced, whether it's because of a lack of access to education or the job requirements that they haven't had access to be able to build those, or they do have them, but they're just not getting a go. And so there's this kind of misperception that, we're going to lower the playing field, we're going to lower the bar in a way, right? We're going to say, no, actually we want diversity, so we'll take people who aren't fit for this job because we want to prioritise diversity. We know that that's not the reality.
Yeah.
The reality is when we do diversity, equity, inclusion work well, we actually just look harder. We look harder for people who do have the skill sets, but also bring with them a richness of diversity, which we know improves our innovation, improves our productivity, improves job satisfaction for everybody in an organisation. There was some excellent research that came out of the Diversity Council Australia that showed that men working in organisations that had a strong focus on diversity, equity and inclusion actually had much greater job satisfaction than men working in organisations that didn't have that focus.
Oh, wow.
So it's about creating inclusion and better experiences for everybody, but also recognising the specific barriers that keep groups of people out of the workplace.
So as a consultant in this space, what are some of the strategies? How do you work with companies to go through that process? What does that strategy look like?
It's definitely different with each organisation based on where they're at. I strongly believe we've got to meet organisations where they're at. If I'm working, I just recently got to work with an excellent organisation that's running bullying programs in schools. When I'm working with them, we're starting at a very different point because they absolutely understand marginalisation and exclusion, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I'm working with some other organisations that are very highly trade and construction focused, and we have to take very different approaches there. But essentially the first step is still the same. It's about listening to the people.
Yeah.
What is the experience of the people who are already in the organisation and who is in the organisation? We collect that data and then we create specific mechanisms to address the issues that are obvious in that particular organisation.
Yeah. And the pronoun thing at the end of people's signatures, that was a really big thing at one point, wasn't it? Everyone was like, do we, don't we, do we? And now it's almost just the normal. Everyone's just come together and it's a real collective now, and you're not forced if you don't want to do a she, her, or a they, them, but I find that a lot of people do it and they're really comfortable with it, and it's a really, really positive thing, isn't it?
It is a positive thing, and I like the sophistication that's come now. So, initially there were some organisations that were like, right, everybody's got to put their pronouns on their signatures. The problem with that is you're forcing people to out themselves in a space that they perhaps aren't comfortable doing so. Yeah. And so you're asking your trans and gender diverse employees to lie or to out themselves. And so that's really problematic. So best practice is absolutely having opportunities for employees too, and educating employees who are cisgendered, whose gender aligns with the sex they were assigned at birth. So that's currently the majority of the population. That cisgendered people understand why they should put their pronouns. And the reason that would be great, the reason that it is great that people do introduce themselves with their pronouns or have it on their email signature is because when I see that as a gender diverse person, I instantly feel like that person will be kind and a safe space for me.
Yeah, okay.
So it's actually sending a message of inclusion as much as it's people will say, oh, don't worry, pronouns don't matter to me. Well, they do to trans people.
Yeah.
So if you can send that message of inclusion, then instantly we might go, okay, maybe I'm a little bit safer here than I thought I was before.
Okay. And how are we excluding them? If you have someone in a workplace that goes through a transgender while they're in that workplace that we are seeing and aware of another client we're just dealing with at the moment who she's becoming a he, which is still currently employed, and the staff is still quite new to actually see it's actually a younger person, so who's still currently at school, and it's quite a young environment. So that is challenging itself too, to try and get people to understand that and accept that.
And there is one staff member that's really struggling.
Older,
with an older staff member that is struggling.
I find the older
with this transition.
The older generation, I think, like the ones at 50, 60-year-olds in his current workplace can't seem to accept it, and almost obviously they've changed their name. I'm making them up, but it was Danny and now it's Dan. Yeah, I'm just making a name up. And this person can't seem to accept that. So how is that person feeling? Are they feeling
I guess what strategies can the business put in place to make everybody feel comfortable?
No, but what are they feeling though? Are they feeling, I want to try and understand, with someone not accepting, are they feeling left out? Like what's happening?
What's behind it?
Is it they're having mental, what impact are we having by not accepting them?
Great questions. I think when we think about the person who is struggling to accept, quite often what I find that's actually based on fear that they're going to be seen to get it wrong. And therefore they're going to kind of stand out as this person, potentially be labelled as the bigot, right? The person who couldn't get on board with it. So sometimes that drives it, is this fear of getting things wrong. And so we work closely with employees and leaders as well to really feel comfortable getting it wrong, because it's actually okay. It's the point that we're trying to accept people, and we don't have to always share the same beliefs. but we can absolutely be respectful and recognise people's own path and their own identities, right?
Yeah.
But giving people permission to make mistakes is one of the really important things. I think, though, the question that you're really asking is, what is the impact on that trans young person if people aren't accepting of them? And unfortunately, it's very dire. So we know that trans youth particularly have the highest level of mental health concerns out of the whole population. They're also the most likely to attempt self-harm and commit self-harm. So they are one of the most at-risk populations in our community, and so whatever we can do to create a safe space for them and for us is absolutely important, is incredibly important. So, yeah, we have to get this right, but we also have to be able to work with our employees and our leaders to actually give them the skills and the tools and the permission to explore this and understand it. We should do that before we have an employee come out in the workplace.
Yes.
So if you're in an organisation now and you do not have a gender transition or a gender affirmation process and policy in place, you need one, because that first person shouldn't have to be the guinea pig and have to deal with what you're describing.
I don't think any policy we worked across any company really has that. That's not something we've seen it sometimes, but it's definitely
It's not the normal.
But it needs to become that, absolutely. But the person actually I was talking to in this workforce who's had this, I think it was a male who turned female actually, he has said the reason why it's impacted him so much because he's lost his mate. So that was quite interesting. So he said he had his best mate in the workforce, then the best mate transitioned to a female, and then he felt that disconnect and felt like he's really lost his mate. So that's the reason why he's really struggled. So I thought it was quite interesting, and that's why he's kind of not including, because he doesn't really know what. He's lost his best mate, so he's like, I don't really know what to do here. So
this is a really interesting point, and we hear the same kind of thing from parents of children who transition, and we have to really consistently reframe them, because that is exactly the same person that they always knew. Yeah. It is just now that that person has finally felt safe and comfortable and have the knowledge to come out as who they are. Yeah. So there is no room for grief here, because you haven't lost anything. That person is still there. They are now just a better version of themselves because they've been able to embrace their own identity.
Yeah, okay.
And so it's a hard conversation to have with parents, but it's a really important one, because it is awful for a trans or gender diverse person to feel like people are grieving over the person that they lost when they're like, hang on.
I'm still here.
I had years of torture not knowing who I was. Now I know who I am. This is a celebration moment. I'm affirming my gender. This should be a positive thing. I understand this is difficult for people around me, and that's okay for it to be difficult. But I think that kind of grief processing needs to happen somewhere else, not in front of that trans person.
Yeah, because you often hear if you watch a show or and it's about a transition happening, you often hear the mother or the father go, I'm grieving for, the grandchildren I'm not going to get, and you think, well, it's
not about you either, is it?
Yeah, and it is not about them, is it? It's not about mum and dad. It's about this person who is so brave and has decided, I'm going to be who I need to be, and this is what I'm going to do about it.
Yeah, and it can be like that's not to dismiss the feelings that parents will have. It will be a challenging time for many parents who didn't foresee this coming. But it's just that really continuing to reframe that this is a positive thing.
Do you ever see, though, I'm going to throw a spanner in the works because I always do. Do you ever see that some people are quite young, are doing it for attention, or doing it maybe when they're not? Like, same thing, like when we talk about, sometimes you talk about the gay society, and sometimes people with men that decide to go off with women and go back to men, and it's almost a bit of a tension kind of thing sometimes happens in some areas. I just don't know, does that ever happen that some people are doing it for that reason then maybe regret it, or is it, I just don't know if it's going to be be taken out of context. I know it's a really deep
topic. But it's a great question, because it's what's it's kind of one of the leading arguments for anti-trans activists is that it's all these children making these decisions that affect their lives forever, and they change their minds. The reality is they don't. The research shows that actually the percentage of trans people who actually change their minds at some point in their life is just almost zero. It's so minimal. You wouldn't choose to do this. I'm very proud to be gender diverse. I'm very proud to be trans. That it does not make my life easier.
Yeah.
This is not something that people try on for fun because it's daily. You are constantly daily facing systems that don't work for you, facing people who will discriminate against you. People think that it's not that now, that things have moved on, but the reality is, just yesterday our Prime Minister made a transphobic comment to Piers Morgan, and that reverberates through the trans community like, stabs in the heart. So it's not something people are like going, oh, this is fun. The question is usually like, well, we're seeing like this trans explosion, right, in youth. All of a sudden there's all these kids who are coming out as trans.
Yes, it seems like a trend.
It's like,
it sounds horrible,
trendy.
doesn't it? It seems like trend at the moment, which I know it's not, but just...
And the reality is we were always here. I didn't come out as trans until 3-4 years ago. Yeah. But I knew from the age of 4 that I wasn't a girl.
Okay. Yeah, right. And
we were always here. We just didn't have the language. We didn't have the space, the safety, the acceptance to actually be ourselves.
And that, I think, is something we were talking about before around, my goodness, if my 9-year-old came to me and suddenly said, do you know what? I'm done being a girl. I mean, I would go, hang on a minute, I've never heard this before. Yeah. But we were sort of chatting around, if your child has been saying from 2, 3, 4, I'm a boy, I'm a boy, I'm a boy, and then they get to 9, 10, 11, I guess for a parent, at what point do you go, oh my God, okay, this is happening, we're going to go down that transition path at that age? Or do you hold off until they're 16? I mean, it's a really...
Is there a law around it?
What
do
you do? I mean, you follow the child.
Yeah, okay.
Chances are that it's very high chance they're not going to talk to you about it because we receive so many gendered messages every day in our lives. And if you're a young person grappling with your identity, you are hearing that all the time. Yep. You're hearing why it's wrong for you to be anything but the gender that everybody has assumed for you. And so it's highly likely that kids are going to come to their parents for the first time at 9, 10, 13, 14 and say, you know what, I'm not a girl, I'm actually non-binary. Yeah. And you have to follow that child because we know that family support is the key determinant to positive mental health outcomes for trans kids over everything else. So if the parent can support them through that journey, and of course there's a whole range of things that go in place if that child does decide that they want medical intervention to hold off puberty for a period of time. There's a whole lot of processes that have to happen there, and the wait lists are enormous. So it takes forever anyway.
Oh, okay. Is there is there actually a legal requirement or policy around an age that can, I don't know, is there much in place? Or?
It just depends what type of transition that child's wanting to do, but if you want to seek a medical transition, there are absolutely rules around that.
There's a massive wait list for it. It's actually quite hard.
It's not very hard to get into the gender clinics. Yeah, there's not enough resources and there's not enough funding, which is a real problem for kids who know that they're absolutely trans and they have to unfortunately go through puberty anyway, and you can't undo the impacts of
that's
puberty.
right.
Is it just Australia, though, that's limited, or is it worldwide?
No, worldwide, yep.
Bree, do you work with schools? I mean, what are schools implementing around this sort of thing? Because obviously we're talking about children and, it's fundamental to get it right, as you've said. What are these schools doing around policies and procedures to help these kids if they identify and they come out and say, this is who I am, I'm going to go through this? And how do they, I guess, cascade that down so that the kids in school that don't get it don't go down that, isolating this child? And I mean, do you have an answer for that, or am I going to way too left?
I do some work with schools. It's clearly not my key area of expertise, but schools are calling out for help because resources are limited. And so I actually do a lot of work in Catholic schools because I have a Catholic upbringing and I went to a Catholic school. And so some schools are doing this really well, and there's a lot of great resources out there from Safe Schools, from Transcend, etc. So a lot of schools are really doing this well, and there's a lot of schools that need a fair bit of help to get it right. And the reality is, and the reason Catholic schools come to me is because they've got many kids that, you know, who are coming out as trans in their schools,
Yeah.
and they absolutely want to provide the best experience for their children, regardless of gender identity.
Yeah.
And so, they're reaching out. They are trying to get it right, but there's unfortunately, still a lot of schools who aren't getting it right.
I mean, my daughter, she's year 9, she's Sacred Heart, and Sacred Heart do it really well. They've actually, I mean, they're a Catholic school. They have got a huge diversity day. And they, you know, she comes home, she talks about it, and I don't know how often they do it, but it blows my mind that, especially Catholic schools, I hate to call it out, but that they've come a long way, right? They're amazing now, so it's really good to see.
It's going to be a long way for this journey anyway. Like, I know we say inclusion and things, it's still going to take probably years. Like, this is going to be a journey, isn't it, that we need to go on and companies need to go on to incorporate this code of conduct into work, like a policy around this. It's not normal, I would say, at the moment, but I do agree with you. It's really sad to think someone has to come out to then create the policy. I do agree, which that poor person has to be that guinea pig to get it created, which would be really awkward.
Yeah.
So if we create it from the start, then we don't have to.
And then you will attract employees. There's such interesting stats out of the US showing that 80% of millennials will choose to work in an organisation that is visibly LGBTIQA plus inclusive than one that isn't, regardless of whether they're LGBTI themselves or not.
Okay.
So we know
that, though?
That young people are seeking inclusive workplaces.
How would you
Promote that?
Yeah, how would a company promote that they're inclusive without?
Yeah.
You wouldn't know they had that policy, not probably when you're applying for
a
a job.
You will. If you're trans and gender diverse, you will absolutely only apply for organisations that you know are going to create a safe space for you, or at least trying to. And so, of course, you look straight at their website, you talk to people, word of mouth, you check out LinkedIn and what the leaders are saying, what's happening at that organisation on things like it's IDAHOBIT Day in a couple of weeks, what's going on, does it look tokenistic or does it look genuine?
Yeah, okay.
If I go to the site, to the workplace, can I see all gender bathrooms? You know, there's lots of signs that people can
That's a
pick up.
good topic, actually.
Yeah, that's
the
interesting.
gender bathrooms, like, what does that look like? I don't think I've ever worked for anyone who's had
footy club. I was at this footy the other day, and there was
co-ed.
All gender.
All gender.
Yeah.
So
All
then
gender.
I was with my partner, and we both just walked in, and I'm like, oh wow, this is interesting. Like, because I know it's
Both went for a wee together.
Yes, which sounds odd. We should be able to, but we haven't for so many years.
Yeah.
It's, even though it's should be acceptable, it's change, and it's just like
I'll never forget one night I was in Sydney and I ended up in a nightclub, God knows, and I remember I went to the bathroom, went to the sink, washed my hands, and there was a guy standing on the opposite side of the glass also washing his hands, and I was like, this is as close as it got back in my day when we were nightclubbing and stuff. Like, I was like waving at him and he's waving at me, but now we're walking into bathrooms together, aren't we? Which we've come a long way.
What do you think? What's your?
There is some of the most frequent harm to trans and gender diverse people happens in women's bathrooms, because women absolutely police who walks into a bathroom. And so, there can be some really horrible incidents. I know many people who are trans in workplaces and they literally don't drink during the day because they do not have a bathroom that they can use. You can imagine what that does to their productivity, right?
Wow.
That's horrible.
So we need all gender bathrooms. They don't have to be the only bathrooms, you know, and most workplaces will find a way to create some all gender spaces and the rest stay as male and female bathrooms. You know, workplaces will actually just go and change the signs and say, this set of toilets have toilets, this set has toilets and urinals. You choose. I've also seen organisations who don't have the capacity to change to all gender bathrooms currently because of the structure or whatever's existing. They stick up signs in the bathroom saying people can choose the bathroom that suits their gender identity.
Yeah,
so it's just a nice sign to say, don't police people. Let people use the bathroom that
they want to.
That they need to use.
Would it ever come down to, I'm really delving into it though, how about like a 15-year-old girl's doesn't work, or 16-year-old girl's working in a workplace and there's a 6-year-old man that's going in and they're going to the same bathroom and that girl feels quite threatened by that older man in there.
I mean, that's a huge topic.
Do you know what I mean? That kind of stuff, that security too of them feeling, because then you're almost exposing maybe them to not feel safe. Then if they're in there and then an older male walks in, because they're so used to probably having a safe space going into a female toilet, they may feel safe. We're kind of breaking down that safe. I don't know. That's just thoughts come to my mind.
Yeah, look, I think that's not as, a regular occurrence. I think when, you can see the City of Greater Geelong have put up new toilets at the Botanic Gardens. They're all gendered. And it's like an open space with, where the sinks are, it's all open space. And then there's just 10 cubicles lined up that are separate. Yeah. So, individual
it's like
cubicles.
A festival.
It's not like it's not like you're walking in and there's 10 men standing at a urinal. There's clever ways to do it.
Yeah. It's like a festival actually. They just have toilets, don't they?
Oh, well, do you remember those offshore days and when you'd go to festivals and it was just portable toilet after portable toilet, and everyone was in and out, and
it didn't matter. I just needed to go. I didn't care where I went. You're that busting, and the line's that much,
and everything's so disgusting and dirty anyway.
That's why you go behind a tree anyway, don't you? I think it's quicker.
Yeah, it sure was back then.
Yeah, well, I just think sometimes the lines were so long, and even you're busting. And you also don't want to miss. Your band comes on, you don't want to miss. You just like
Chili Peppers.
Yeah, you just got to do what you got to do. But I just think I do agree it needs to come. I think it's just people are not sure. I think sometimes people don't mean. Sometimes I think it don't mean not to include someone.
Exactly.
It's not because they don't want to. Sometimes you can feel uncomfortable, you don't want to say the right thing or disengage with them. So sometimes you say nothing because you think that's better, but then that probably makes them feel not included, but you're not.
That goes back to what Bree was saying at the start with fear.
Yes. It's this fear, and I talk, I run inclusive leadership workshops, and the first question I ask the leaders is, what do you fear most about the diversity, equity and inclusion space? What's your biggest challenges? And they say, I'm just afraid of getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And so we talk about leaning into that discomfort and being prepared to get it wrong, because when you get it wrong, then if you're open to listen to the feedback, then you can learn how to get it right. And we have to embrace that. We have to recognise that for people who have disability, for people who are people of colour, LGBTIQA plus people, we don't get that choice. We don't get to choose to end up in those kind of interactions or not, right? But as a person who doesn't experience exclusion or, has an opportunity to be an ally, even if you get it wrong, the fact that you're doing something means so much, because you're working through your privilege.
Which is amazing. That's such amazing. Yeah, you get me think about it that way.
Yeah, for sure. So, Bree, if somebody wanted to use your consultative services, where do they find you?
Website is www.breegorman.com.
Awesome.
So pretty easy, and I'm pretty prolific on LinkedIn, so you can go there and check me out.
Yeah, and you're consultant to companies. I'm assuming just small to medium businesses, or is it certain sizes, or is it just?
It's all currently. It's a lot of government and universities. Yeah. But I really enjoy working with corporates of all sizes.
Yeah, so cool.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That was such a great chat.
That was really.
It was fun. Love to have you back.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Bree.
All right.